Ted London, Director of the Base of the Pyramid Initiative at the William Davidson Institute. And I'm here today with Brian Trelstad, the Chief Investment Officer at Acumen Fund. Brian, thank you for taking the time to talk.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Acumen Fund and what you're up to these days?
Sure. Acumen Fund was founded in 2001. It was spun out of and supported with an initial grant from the Rockefeller Foundation and several individual philanthropists who are interested in spotting and supporting high-impact innovation in emerging markets. Over the first 5 years, we made about $10 or $15 million of investments in health, water, and housing social enterprises. Over the last 18 months, we've made about $15 million of new investments. So we've literally doubled in the past year and a half and are looking to get to $100 million of investments under management by 2011, 2012.
Can you talk a little bit more about your investment model? How has that evolved over time in terms of the support you provide to the different ventures you work with?
Sure. In the first couple of years, the premise was that we could take philanthropy from the U.S. and with grants support entrepreneurs overseas with grants. And we invested in a low-cost hearing aid, which we thought had tremendous potential, field-based immunosensor, a disease diagnostic, a PDA that would help in emergency medical care. And we realized that the grants for technology development were not effective in building sustainable businesses. So in 2003, the model shifted from receiving grants and making grants to receiving philanthropic contributions and making commercial-like transactions, debt investments or equity investments in for-profits or nonprofits that have scalable, sustainable business model. Today, we still do a tiny number of grants when a philanthropist comes to us and says we'd like to subsidize the distribution of bed nets. But for the most part, we act like a venture capital fund or a commercial bank in supporting the capital needs of these businesses.
Why do you see this as a better model than traditional grant making to ventures?
With a limited supply of philanthropic capital, we think that supporting sustainable businesses that generate revenues from user fees, from selling products that the poor need and want, that there's the potential to sustain impact over time. We also think that the market is a terrific listening device, that if you are able to make and deliver a product or service that the poor need and can afford, and they continue to buy it, and you can continue to sell it to them at less than they're willing to buy it, that's an important piece of feedback that's currently missing in the development debate. We also are clear, although it's hard to be totally transparent, on the need for and the place of subsidies in the model. And it's not that the free market can solve all problems of poverty, but we do believe that market mechanisms can play a role in the value chain for delivering assistance to the poor.
What sort of a return are you expecting on these investments? Because clearly one part of this model is that this fund over time will become increasingly self-sustaining, so perhaps you'll be less reliant on donors.
Sure. We don't have a hurdle rate, but if an investment coming in doesn't look like it can return 8 or 10% over the 5 to 7 year time period, then that's 8 or 10% IRR, so 8 to 10% per year. We aren't sure we will do the investment. Typical venture capitalist is going to look at, a 20 to 25% return, and emerging markets venture capitalists might look at 30, 40% return. So we think we're looking at below market returns, but we're willing to accept fairly high risk ventures that are 10% on a good day in the upside case, and the downside case is one we're willing to live with.
Now, for grants, there is no return. For loans, it's fairly clear how you're going to get paid back. How do you get paid back on the equity side?
No exit. Right. When we structure our investments, our first starting point will be to create a preferred instrument where there's a dividend and there might be a forcing mechanism for us to require the entrepreneur to either buy out our position or to sell the company. While those are standard terms in Silicon Valley, they're not standard in Hyderabad. So we often have to come into investments simply as common equity holders. We do think that it's likely in several of our ventures that strategic buyers will come in, multinationals who recognize the potential market. And in cases where the strategic potential exists, we're comfortable with just becoming an equity holder, a common equity holder. There are a smaller number of cases where there's real rapid growth and a public offering might be possible. And in another set of cases, we will ask the entrepreneurs to allow us to either force a buyout or trigger a sale of the company. We haven't gotten there yet. We're not sure whether we would ever enforce those clauses, but we're trying to think through what this, what the range of exit options will be. And liquidity in these markets is a big open question for us right now.
You've made a strategic decision to focus on certain sectors and certain geographic regions. Can you talk kind of what those sectors are, what those regions are, and what the logic is behind that?
Yeah, we started in health. After 9/11, we're approached by some donors to look at working in Pakistan and Egypt on a range of social enterprises. That fund evolved into our housing portfolio. In 2003, we were approached to create a water portfolio, and in 2007, we launched energy. Along the way, in the first 3 or 4 years, we added geographies on the basis of a new investment. Something cool in Egypt, let's do it. Something cool in Tanzania, let's do it. We realized that it was extremely expensive to continue to learn the regulatory environment, to continue to fly to new geographies. So in 2005, we said, hold on, let's stop where we are. Let's build local capacity. Let's hire local country directors, local teams. Let's incorporate and let's build a model where we would have essentially interdependent local offices. They're still linked into our New York office for most of their financial support and back office resources, but over time we'd like them to raise money, identify deals. The investment standards are still global, so all investment decisions are still made by a global investment committee. But we realized that the sort of transaction costs of doing a new deal in a new country were off the charts, and so we want to consolidate our geographic footprint. We may add new issue areas within a given geography. We think it's a little bit easier to add, say, agriculture or education within India than it might be to do health in West Africa. In the next 5 years, we do think we'll add 1, 2, maybe 3 geographic clusters, whether it's West Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, is to be determined.
When you think about the enterprises, the enterprises that you invest in, can you talk a little bit more about kind of what is it you look for in an enterprise? What fits the Acumen profile? Not so much of the return, but kind of the type. And how big is that pool of businesses out there that you might be willing to look at?
The starting point is the entrepreneur, and whether they have both the will to serve the poor and the skill to do it in a cost-effective way. The second thing we look at is the model itself, and the dimension of things one would look at in an early-stage venture. What's the market? Do they want it? What is the need? Can they deliver it at the unit economics? Do they work? The third then is sort of the growth plan and trajectory. So we look at things through a fairly typical venture capital lens with a very clear focus on the entrepreneurs as somebody that we want to partner with and somebody we think shares our values. I think there are more ideas out there than there are entrepreneurs willing to spearhead those ideas. I think that there are more entrepreneurs who've got these great ideas than there are teams capable of executing. So we see plenty of great ideas, but that don't have really the local capacity to pull them off. We see plenty of charismatic entrepreneurs who don't have the full complement of partners, the operations, the marketing, the sales experience to really execute and grow to scale. So it's a big question for the sector is, are there hundreds of these investable deals in India or Africa? And we're beginning to get our head around it. We feel confident that if we want to get to 100 million over the next 5 years, that there's enough deal flow in the geographies where we exist to hit that goal. But there is an open question for the sector. How many deals are out there?
And how big does the organization need to be? In the sense, there's micro-lending, which takes care of the smaller ones. And then there's kind of traditional bank financing, which would take care of the larger, more mainstream. What's that niche, the sweet spot for you guys?
The missing middle, we sometimes call it. The sweet spot for us is some revenues, a value, an enterprise value of around $1 million. Revenues probably less than $1 million, but can go up to 5 or 10 plausibly within the next 3 to 5 years. We don't want to finance companies that could otherwise attract commercial capital, because we feel like we'd be replacing or subsidizing or distorting those local capital markets. But we want to finance companies that have the potential to attract commercial capital over the horizon of our investment.
How do you think about startups? Is that something you fund, or do you have a special mechanism for them if you think it's an interesting opportunity?
We looked at a bunch of startups in our first few years, and we realized that the product risk and the team risk was too high for us. We've realized that we typically don't want to fund real startups, but that rules are meant to be broken. So we have made exceptions, and we've been thinking about a concept that we call labs, which would be smaller, couple $100,000. It would still need to be an equity or debt or royalty participation structure. We don't want to give grants out and go back and relearn those lessons. But we want to be able to make fast, quick decisions on early stage ideas. And if we think there's some real outsized social impact potential, we will consider those. And we've done 2 or 3 labs this year. We've looked at a battery LED light company. We are looking at a new anti-malarial product company, all of whom need $200,000 or $300,000 for proof of concept or field trials, marketing trials, and if in fact they work, the manufacturing capabilities all been worked out, the marketing expertise is at the table. It's just a question of whether the product will get market acceptance at a price point where people will buy it.
So you're exploring sort of some different types of enterprises to fund in terms of both startup and existing, across some different sectors and across some different geographies. Do you think providing the funding is sufficient? Is that the real niche that Acumen is going to kind of stay in?
We don't think capital is the constraint. We think it's management assistance. We think it's business insights. We think it's the network of our entrepreneurs talking to one another. It's sharing best practices. So we've invested heavily in the knowledge creation and sharing. We've invested in a fellowship program, which we think will bring talent to talent-starved enterprises. So the capital is important, and we believe that if we were just providing if we were just providing knowledge and management assistance and talent, we'd be a consulting firm. And to have an equity ownership or a real stake in the company and bring resources to bear aligns our interests, gives us a meaningful say in the strategic direction of the enterprise in a way that a consulting firm might not alone or just a financier. So we think that the model works, and it's the complementarity of capital, knowledge, talent that works together.
Now, some might argue that it's starting to sound less like a venture capital model and something a little different. How do you reconcile this kind of, there are important aspects, but should Acumen be the organization doing it? And why have you decided that it's something that you as an institution want to cover?
Right. The exact benchmarks for how much you spend doing due diligence and providing post-investment management assistance in this space aren't totally clear. The transparency, information in the sector is still not where we'd like it to be. But the rule of thumb is somewhere between 20, 25 cents on the dollar for our portfolio team to help them write the business plan, work the investment through documentation, and then provide post-investment support. It's a combination of the fact that the deals are typically smaller than a typical venture fund at $1 million versus $3, $5, $7, $10 million, and that the work is a little bit harder. These are new models, new markets, new customers. The other stuff that we do in terms of knowledge and talent in the fellowships program is more like a nonprofit. But if you isolate the portfolio costs and the resources we bring, it looks fairly, it looks close to the other social investors who are also in that 20 cents on the dollar. It's why we don't think that venture capital at this missing middle level is financially viable at this point. That a 2 in 20 fund would have a very hard time on that 2% expense base. There are just too many transaction costs. The amount of support required is too much. It may be that there are funds that come in after and do follow-on investments in an Acumen Fund that can vet deals that have been through an Acumen Fund or an Ashoka or an E&Co, and very, very cost-effectively source those investments and provide the follow-on capital. But right now, the stage that we're in terms of the assistance we provide, the economics wouldn't work out for a commercial venture fund. But we think that our economics are improving, and we think that they will get closer and closer to the point where we believe the capital markets will look at this sector as a viable asset class.
How do you resolve the tension of you're investing potentially more and more in developing fellows and in knowledge management,
right,
which is harder to develop a return from, so it looks less and less like a sustainable model for you guys. Do you have some tension in the organization about whether you want to pursue that or not, and what conclusions have you reached around that?
No conclusions yet, and there is tension. Again, the portfolio work on its own, we want to become self-sufficient over time. If you get an 8 or 10% IRR in your portfolio with a 20% overhead cost over 5, 6, 7 years, the returns can pay for the direct portfolio activity. So if we aspire to make the funding work self-sufficient, we can then go out into the philanthropic marketplace. If our knowledge isn't worth anything and foundations like the Skoll Foundation or the Gates Foundation don't want to pay us for the kind of work we're doing in metrics or working with WDI and helping generate cases, then they'll tell us, and we won't be able to generate the resources to do it. We're not going to do that from unrestricted resources. We'll go out and find philanthropic support for it. The same is true for the fellowship. We are looking at different revenue models for the fellowship, but a number of corporates have contributed money to have their employees go through the fellowship program, and if we can come up with a sustainable business model on the fellowship program independently, then we think it's got a place in the philanthropic marketplace. As long as we're clear that we're looking at them as separate pillars of activity, then we can justify, I think, the portfolio funding work.
And how do you see them as being synergistic as opposed to just separate pillars?
It's hard to separate the work that we do. I mean, the credibility of our knowledge is generated from the frontline insights that a portfolio manager who's working on doing due diligence in a hospital chain is going to surface. And the kind of talent that we're able to bring to bear with the fellowship program to provide the value proposition to the hospital chain, which is being approached by 2 or 3 different funders, helps differentiate Acumen Fund. So, the knowledge makes the investor or the portfolio manager's job easier, theoretically, can contribute back to that knowledge pool. The talent makes us a unique investment resource, again, in an increasingly competitive landscape where there are lots of folks chasing, as we talked about, too few deals. If we have this pool of talent that we can bring to bear, we think that the combination of those assets is going to make us unique in the marketplace. It's not quite clear how they all fit together at times, but we have a sort of a long-range picture of understanding that it's not the size of a $100 million or $500 million portfolio that's going to make a difference. It's the lessons, the models that we lift out from the work that will have the long-term impact. And it's going to take a lot of effort through this sort of talent mechanism to generate those models. So, again, the pieces of the puzzle sometimes don't quite fit together, but we think that the directionally we're onto something.
Do you have a sense of, say, not 4 or 5 years from now, but 10 or 15 years from now or longer, what does Acumen look like?
We've talked about splitting out the fund into something that would be closer to commercially viable, and we're, again, looking at tapping into the capital markets. And we've talked about lumping the knowledge and talent into something we sometimes internally called Acumen Fund University, that would in fact be a combination of training and leadership development, policy and knowledge sharing, networking for social enterprises, and that it would be really something much closer to a traditional fund that is tapping into the capital markets, like microfinance institutions have been able to raise money today. And on the other side, a little bit more coherence and heft and independence on the knowledge and talent work.
So as you reflect back on your experiences, serving base of the pyramid ventures over the past years, what are the big lessons that you've learned? What are maybe the challenges you faced and the lessons that you've learned in this space?
The big lesson is that no matter what the business plan says, add 18 months. That there's a lot of raw execution challenge. A second lesson is that the communication, the game of telephone, literally in a global institution, is as challenging to deliver a consistent message from entrepreneur to portfolio team in Hyderabad or Pakistan to portfolio team member in New York, and that over-communicating is absolutely critical. Third, that really capital isn't the constraint. There's enough money out there. It's unlocking the liquidity in the local markets as well as in the global markets. It's the talented resources that are needed to help build these enterprises.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate taking the time to talk today.
Thank you.